Hello friends, so today's video is going to be about 3 times that the book was not better than its adaptation. Obviously, a lot of us being manga fans, being book fans, when we get something adapted, when we get a movie, a TV show, a video game, an anime, we have a little bit of reservations, especially with fantasy, because we just know it's very difficult to pull off an adaptation of those kinds of stories. However, every now and then there will be one of those kinds of mediums that will come along that will actually do the story, not only do it justice, but do it better. And I wanted to highlight 3 times that I think that this is the case. The first one I want to start with would be Witcher. And no, I am not referring to the Netflix adaptation. That is absolutely not better than the books, in my opinion. But I do think that The Witcher 3, The Wild Hunt by CD Projekt Red takes everything great about the Witcher books and it expands on them. I actually think, for my personal opinion, I think stories are best told through video games. It's just we don't get very many video games that really highlight fantastic characters, great dialogue, great stories, and I think that CD Projekt Red has done that. And it had something to work with to start. So that's a big help, obviously. I don't think that The Wild Hunt could really exist as well as it does without the fact that Andrzej Sapkowski has created a very interesting world. It just translates so well to video game format. One specific reason for this is that Sapkowski really in his books has somewhat of a bird's eye view. The more into the Witcher series you go, the more detached you actually get from the characters, and you start to really see how the actions of certain individuals who are generally of noble birth, how their actions affect everyone, how it trickles down, and it has the biggest impact on the people that have the least security in their lives, whether that be wealth, whether that be power, whether that be magic. And so you have this sense of detachment, but what that does do is it creates a very interesting world. And something that's really great about video games, and especially modern games, is the way that they craft the worlds and the way they do open worlds. So when you go to various different cities, when you interact with various spies or nobles, there is this sense of it feels very real, it feels very authentic, and Geralt is just a person who exists within that world. In book format, it actually is one of the things that while I love the books, it does make me feel that I can't love them quite as much. I can't quite call that series one of my all-time favorites, meaning top 5, because there is that little bit of, I just wish I knew Geralt more, I just wish I was more connected with him. But when you're navigating that world through Geralt in the video game, you get that connection to him and you get the world itself. On top of that, Sapkowski, I actually think, is a stronger short story writer than he is series writer. And because it starts with 2 collections of short stories, I think CD Projekt Red took that concept and also expanded on that. It works really well, specifically with side quests. Side quests in open world games usually are boring. Usually the quest lines are just non-existent. There's just some bare minimum, poorly voiced random NPC who advises you to go somewhere, and it's just so you can get a piece of something, or you can get a piece of armor, or you can learn a spell, or whatever the case may be. It's just usually something to do, and it's not really that fun or that engaging. And part of what makes The Wild Hunt a fantastic game is that the side quests are arguably more hard-hitting than the actual main quest. I didn't care about the main quest, which is rare. I hardly cared. I did care about the main quest, but I was shocked how much I cared about. You would just start a quest that you thought was nothing, and then all of a sudden you're like, why am I feeling so emotional right now? And the gray morality that's explored, that's something Sapkowski does well, and CD Projekt does it very well. And so I think they took his skill with short story writing and they really were like, we're going to do this justice, and they did with their side quests and the main quest too. There's a way of, even though it's a 3rd game, you don't feel like you have to play the previous 2 to really feel like you are getting everything you want out of it. You don't really feel like you're going to be missing out if you just jump into The Wild Hunt. I think most of us did just jump into The Wild Hunt, and then that's how we got into Witcher. They did an absolutely amazing job. I feel like the popularity of Witcher can all be credited to CD Projekt Red. It's an amazing game, and it's not only an amazing game, but it took what was already a cool fantasy story, and I think made it even better. Next up is one where it actually is the Netflix adaptation that I'm referring to, and that would be Shadow and Bone. So the Grishaverse by Leigh Bardugo starts with a trilogy known as the Shadow and Bone trilogy or the Grisha trilogy. You'll hear people call it both things. Then from there, you get the Six of Crows duology, and chronologically, that duology takes place after the events of the original trilogy. It follows a different cast of characters, and you are looking at a different part of the world. So people actually do tell you, and I would say the same thing, that you can read the Six of Crows duology without having read Shadow and Bone. Part of the reason that this gets recommended so often is that the Shadow and Bone trilogy is very angsty. It is much younger in tone, and we are focusing in on one character. It's first-person perspective. She is young. The main target demographic is a younger audience. When you are in your 20s, 30s, 40s, and up, sometimes those themes are a little bit harder to really connect to at that time in your life, which makes sense. You are no longer the target demographic. It doesn't need to be for you. However, that does mean that you might not really like it as much. Six of Crows, despite also being young adult, does have some heavier themes. I think it has more in-depth character development. It really explores mental health and trauma, which is why a lot of people say, just go for Six of Crows. What the Netflix adaptation did is they were like, well, we want to start with Shadow and Bone, but everybody loves these characters over here, so what if we combined them? And I was so nervous for that because I thought, how are they going to make that work? How? I don't think they can. And I was really on the fence. I was willing to give it a go. I'm always willing to usually I should say, I'm willing to try out an adaptation, but I was very nervous. They did such an amazing job. For one, the character backstories in Six of Crows, you do kind of get hints as to what happened in the past. So some of the characters, they literally took their pasts, their backstories, and that was what they explored in the Shadow and Bone Netflix adaptation. So that made a lot of sense. Other characters, they invented certain plot lines for so that they could weave them together with the other characters. That was the part I was especially thinking wasn't going to work, and it did. It's one of the few times that the writers are like, we're going to do our own thing. And I'm like, thank goodness you did your own thing and you trusted yourself and you had the confidence, because what you did was great. And we don't see that very often. A lot of times when writers take it upon themselves to write their own plot lines that are separate from the books, they're not as good. And this time around, it was really good. On top of that, the actual literal adaptation of the Shadow and Bone events and characters, the way that they brought that to life, they did very well. They also a little bit pulled back on some of the angst. They made the love story, I think, a little more accessible for a lot of ages. And I thought the way that the actors portrayed all of these characters is just next to none. I don't think I've ever seen an adaptation where the fandom, they literally, it's like they found, it feels like Leigh Bardugo, sorry, I keep starting a sentence and backtracking because it's just so amazing how perfect these cast members are. But it was as if Leigh Bardugo spotted these human beings long ago and then wrote them in her book and then later on found them again and then put them in the adaptation. That's what it feels like because they're so perfect. And I will say the character of Jesper was one that I didn't love in the Six of Crows duology, and that actor made me really like that character. And he didn't do anything that changed the character. He just brought him to life in a way that had so much charisma, so much charm, so much character. All the cast, absolutely amazing. And it looked visually, I thought it looked quite good too. That's another thing I'm very picky about. If you're not going to animate an adaptation, it's got to look pretty decent. And this one I thought didn't just look decent, I thought it legitimately looked good. I liked the costume design. I think there are things to nitpick about the visuals, but overall I actually think it's one of the best fantasy adaptations we've gotten, kind of quietly. All the hype about Witcher on Netflix, Wheel of Time on Amazon, and I think Shadow and Bone kind of just quietly was a better adaptation than those were. Last for today, we have Dune. So switching into science fiction territory, Dune, it is much more difficult, in my opinion, to really compare the adaptation with the original work because of the difference in time. When the original work came out, it is such a genre-defining book that to go back and look at it, obviously people have taken inspiration from that and expanded on it. So it almost feels like it's a blueprint, and now we get the finished product. So like I said, it's really unfair to compare it to now. However, it does feel like a blueprint just in general. You really don't feel connected to the characters, or at least I didn't. I didn't feel like Frank Herbert wrote these characters in a way where they come to life, where you're writing them really intimately like you do with Kaladin and the Stormlight Archive or things like that. It's very much just, here are the pieces on this chessboard. And in writing it that way, you also don't really feel that much hatred for the villain, even though they are very villainous and they're very terrible. It really just feels like these are the pieces on the board. And the setting, this is the setting, is a desert. Did you know it was a desert? We're in a desert. It's really dry. It's hard to come by water. That's like the main world building of the story. And when it comes to really articulating exactly what's happening and when and how the characters feel about it, I don't really feel like he does much of that either. He just tells you pretty straightforwardly, here is this story. And it feels more like it's about the concepts and it's more about the themes. With a story like that, for me, it is just always going to be difficult to really feel myself fully invested. You're not really pulling on the emotions. You're just sort of presenting ideas. And I thought that the movie did a great job of, one, establishing the visuals, because the visuals are fantastic and they definitely are bringing to life exactly what Frank Herbert is describing. So I think they did a great job with that. I think they made you care about the characters in the story much more than the book did. It also felt less convoluted. It made it a little clearer. I think it helps to just be able to see who's who and keep track of it a little bit better that way. But they didn't sacrifice the thematic elements of the story. Those are still present. They also took their time. The fact that they were splitting that book into 2 parts, I think to some people hearing that might feel like it's a cash grab, but I actually think that it's taking the story seriously and recognizing that it is difficult to adapt a book, especially a thicker book, in one movie. So I actually respect that they were thinking, we're just gonna do half the story in this first film, and then we'll expand on it in the next one. I really respect that decision. If I have one criticism about the movie, it's that Jessica is really overwhelmed. In the book, she's one of the most interesting and it seems like powerful individuals. She seems to almost have this coldness to her, but this protectiveness. And in the movie, she just seems like a mother who's very concerned about everything that's going on with her, with everything. She's just, that's her. She's just always kind of a little panicked. And so I don't know why they decided to make that change. I wasn't a fan of it. I liked her character more in the book, but otherwise I thought it was about as good of an adaptation as we could ask for that story. I'm very curious to know, what are some instances for you of times where the adaptation was better than the books? I would absolutely love to know. Thanks so much for watching though. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day and I'll see you all later. Bye.